this much about what is actually happening, does that keep you awake at night, or are you...
No, I think it motivates me to wake up. Art as a vessel and medium can help us to comprehend things which are extremely abstract and complex, and I think that it's great that we have tons of science being made, data being produced, observation, quantification, but at the end of the day, if you don't feel the loss, you don't act. I grew up actually in Switzerland, not very far from the Geneva Lake, looking at the Alps on one hand, and in my back the Jura, another mountain range, which is a bit less known than the Alps, obviously. So already quite early on, I've been very drawn by the outdoor and been outside a lot. Unfortunately, I could not really fulfill all my dream of hiking up the summit and being evolving freely in the landscape, because I had a handicap. And as a kid, I was actually not able to walk properly due to a hip issue. And therefore, I ended up being quite a lot outside, but genuinely more observing than engaging physically. I was going in the Alps. I was visiting some glacier. Over the course of the years, I could see and I could actually experience glacier retrieving, the eternal ice melting, the eternal snow disappearing. So nothing is eternal. Everything is basically moving and in flux. So I think that quite naturally I understood that some processes were actually ongoing and they were man-made. That was quite obvious. That's the urgency of the 21st century, the climate crisis. I think that on a very slow path, I actually get aware and more aware. And then getting aware, I got also more involved and more interested. And then the more interested and involved you are, the more scary you get and the more you want to know. I was enrolled in the Institute for Spatial Experiment. Olafur Eliasson being my professor, he just did the weather project and he was doing the ice clock. So obviously we were in contact with glaciolog, Rosenminnick, and other personalities which were dealing actually with climate question and knowledge that you could gather from ice. And I think for me it was kind of always interesting to think that the geology, which somehow represents the past but is active in the present and define the future, that we could actually read the past in order to foresee what's coming. And then thinking about time as more sedimentation than a line, as we were doing it at the school on the blackboard. And so this question, they became quite crucial and central in my work. The Arctic is very different in terms of sensing space. When I get there, I felt extremely lost because the tools that I had to actually comprehend a space, a place, scales, they were just obsolete because there was nothing between me and the horizon. And so I could not actually gauge distances or seeing how big or how far things are. And so that was kind of like a very intense unlearning experience that forced me to relearn actually how to evolve in a particular place, and that I reflect a lot in my work later on. Because unlearning, I think it's a very healthy tool to actually recalibrate our way of engaging with the world. And so this very first experience really gave me like some key about like how fragile the construct of my reality was and how subjective it was. So I was standing on the ice cap and it was about 4 p.m. in end of November. And eventually, you know, like there is this incredible blue light in Greenland because the sun is not really reaching the surface of the horizon, but still you have light, but this light is almost like being underwater. And I don't know if you've been diving, but it's kind of like immersion in a deep blue. That's something which really make or let a strong feeling onto you. And so I was kind of like immersed in this blue light, this kind of Greenlandic sunset, even though the sun never rose. And then the eyes become also like to glow from within. So you have this kind of like electrical blue coming from underneath and from above. And so at one time it just kind of merged. And the moment it merged, I felt that I was in full flight because I had the sky above me and eventually I had the sky underneath, like trapped in all the air bubbles. And that was somewhat this idea of like a memory that we were actively losing. Out of a moment like this, then I tried to reflect and create works, and that's what motivated me to make the Pure Waste piece, where I capture carbon dioxide from ambient air to create diamond that I then brought back to Greenland and throw in a glacier mill. It's kind of like an act of reconciliation, but that was actually all this came from like this one very strong moment that I experienced. My work deal actually with also the materiality of the world and also the materiality which we use to build our world. A very large slab of anthracite coal. So I get very interested in material which carries stories, which are strongly connotated, which have been very important for one thing or the other. This is like the material with which we basically build up Europe. Like the whole industrial revolution is built upon the extraction of that stone, actually. So that's why I was very interested in like coal or fuels, because these are material that we are using on a daily basis, but we never really touch, we never really see, we never grasp, neither feel. So we can talk about like burning coal is an issue, but we don't even know really how coals look like or feel, or how can we connect with it. And in front of this mirror, there's always like a little oil lamp, which is hanging with an open flame that you cannot see when you look at the piece. You only see the reflection of the flame into the material. And obviously this mirror will distort your own image, so you become small or big, or so it can just distort your image. And this distortion relates to the distortion that we have through our addiction to fossil fuel, and like how everyday life we're bathing in oil to a certain extent without even really knowing about it. Out of this kind of intimate encounter, I'm trying to kind of like distill these experiences into forms which then can inhabit an exhibition. And then these walks, they're almost like words, and I use them as sentences in my show. And so when you experience an exhibition, it's more like, you know, like a topography or an ecosystem for itself, where all the different artwork, whatever, if they are living plants, objects, pictures, video, they all kind of like act together, and they co-produce their own reality and the kind of like narration that I want to bring through. And then obviously that is giving the audience a possibility to engage with this experience, even if they might not have been on the glacier or on the oil rig or in the palm plantation. They might be transported through this walk. So all the walks are some sort of like, you know, I like to tell they're like magical object or like time portal where people can enter in different dimension and then try to make sense of them. So each of these roads is actually a scar in the landscape, bringing to a little pump. And here you can see pump, pump, pump. And it's like really, it's in the middle of LA, some of it. And then some is also just around LA. But it's really interesting because the whole landscape become a drawing, but as a drawing which almost look like, this is something psychedelic about it, like all these lines are something from like the 70s, this kind of like psychedelic aesthetic. But then each of these lines is actually bringing you to an oil pump, to like a place where we extract crude oil. And that's really like all these scars in the landscape. Most of my work deal with this idea of like humanity as a sphere in friction or collision with a lot of other spheres, and how entangled these things are kind of co-influencing each other, and how violent or brutal our influence can be. And then in the show, obviously, I don't show the human because I'm much more interested in the process, and I think the human is there, is, you know, like we're floating, but we're there more as traces. And that's an invitation. Look at the rave in the palm plantation. No one is dancing. And the question is, where were you? I wanted people to kind of feel lost, you know, because you need to understand that you are lost to find your way. And I think that an exhibition today or art today is probably one of the last resort where you don't find directly answers. And I am not giving answers, I'm questioning. But the beauty of like an art exhibition is that even if you are in, and even if you have your ChatGPT open, they won't tell you exactly what it means, because it's not about this very current meaning. It's about evocation, it's about poetic, it's about actually creating or crafting an experience which somehow it's given to you actually to make your own path through. So each of us will have like a different kind of like subjective and aesthetic experience coming to the museum. And I think that's very important, because art is not science, and we're not trying to tell how things work. Maybe we're asking why things work. Today, because of this urgency, time become kind of a threat, and as when time becomes a threat, it's difficult to act against time, and then eventually, sometime once one can do is just to freeze. But to freeze is actually increasing the problem. So we should not freeze. We should actually act as fast as possible, but then as slow as necessary, because also just the pace in which the world is going is too fast. So if we just mimic this, we're just kind of like encouraging the problem. We've been, over the last 200 years, building more and more barrier to the world. The first barrier is language, because if you talk about the environment surrounding all these worlds, they actually suggest that we are separated, that we are not part of the world, but that there is us and a great outside. Art is a language, and is a language which can basically maybe transcend this separation and help us to rethink the way we inhabit the world. I hope that the children from tomorrow will be able to see wildlife and experience at least a part of what I was able to experience as a kid.